Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
You're just a driver. You don't make the rules. That's what Jared Kindle said right before he fired me, in front of half the damn warehouse. I had grease on my hands, a clipboard under my arm, and a mouthful of half-chewed granola bar when he made it official. 12 years on the job, not a single accident, never called out unless someone in my family was literally being buried, and he cuts me loose like I'm some timp he found on Craigslist. The worst part? He said it like he was doing me a favor, like I'd thank him later for the opportunity to grow from adversity. I remember the sound my keys made when I dropped them on the desk, this little clink that felt way too quiet for what had just gone down. You ever have one of those moments where the whole world slows down and you know you're not going to forget a single detail? That was me, standing there in my steel toe boots, sweaty from the morning route, listening to a guy in designer loafers tell me I was obsolete. Let me paint the picture for you. The company's called Mid-State Freight Solutions, not that you'd know them unless you worked in warehouse logistics around Columbus. We moved specialized manufacturing parts for industrial clients, bolts, bearings, pressure regulators, that kind of stuff. Not sexy, but solid work. I started there 12 years ago when my youngest kid was still in diapers. I worked my way up from a night shift loader to lead route driver, managing deliveries across 3 counties. I trained half the new hires, memorized customer preferences, even built out an Excel sheet to optimize delivery runs on my own time, by the way. And for most of those years, it was good, honest work. Until Jared showed up. Now, Jared Kindle came in with a degree from some tech-forward logistics program and a vibe like he just stepped off a TED Talk stage. He called himself head of operations, even though that job used to be called route manager back when it was held by someone who actually understood trucks. The guy wore a smartwatch and quoted business books nobody asked him about. First week on the job, he held a staff meeting and told us we were on the edge of a digital revolution in freight. I knew then we were all in trouble. At first, it was just annoying stuff. Mandatory trainings on empathy and customer engagement. Sign-ins with a mobile app that froze if you had a bad signal. A new dress code, yes, for drivers. Like the guy thought we were selling luxury cars, not hauling pallets to steel plants. But then the little things started to pile up. Routes got reassigned without explanation. Overtime approvals disappeared. Younger hires with half the experience started getting praise emails from Jared for exceptional growth potential, even when they screwed up basic drop protocols. One of them left an entire shipment at the wrong address, and Jared blamed a labeling system I had built. Said it was too old school. Last Tuesday, it all came to a head. I had just gotten back from a triple drop route out in Newark. One of the manifests had the wrong load count. Someone in intake must have miskeyed the inventory, but Jared blamed me, said I modified the sheet to cover up a missed delivery. I told him I didn't, and that I could prove it by checking the digital logs. He told me to sit down and be accountable. I said I was being accountable. He was the one not listening. That's when he stood up, looked at the warehouse guys like he was auditioning for a damn courtroom drama, and hit me with that line, "You're just a driver, Mick. You don't make the rules." Just like that, I was out. No notice. No write-up. Just a smug look and a manila envelope with my final paycheck. He said, "Turn in your ID and keys." I took the key ring off my belt slowly, like I was handing over something sacred, because honestly, that job had meant a lot to me. I handed him the ring, looked him dead in the eye, and walked out. But here's the thing Jared didn't know, and still doesn't, I bet. He never checked the delivery log. He never bothered to ask who was actually signing those manifests or what routes were being rerouted through third-party loaders. He never looked close enough to realize something was off. And I didn't say a damn word as I left. I got in my truck, my real truck, the one I used to get home, not the company Ford Transit I'd practically lived in, and sat there for a minute, just breathing. Not mad. Not yet. Just stunned. Like I'd been unhooked from something I didn't even realize I'd chained myself to. I called my wife. Told her I was coming home early, and she didn't even sound surprised. "They finally did it, huh?" she said. And then she sighed. Not the relieved kind. The tired kind. That night, I had 2 beers and watched reruns of Frasier. I needed something smart, but not too happy. Something that understood what it felt like to be the punchline in your own story. But around midnight, I pulled out the backup copies of the delivery logs I'd started keeping 6 months ago. Just to be safe. Just in case. Jared had been forging timestamps, using my ID number for deliveries I never made. Probably to meet those shiny KPIs he kept bragging about in his quarterly reports. I stared at that spreadsheet, half drunk and still in my work boots, and realized I had something he didn't. I had evidence. I had time. And I had nothing to lose. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you make sure he heard the ticking sound of everything about to fall apart? Because I'm not just a driver. I know where the bodies are buried, and I'm damn good with directions. It didn't happen all at once, the way movies like to show it, with a dramatic betrayal and swelling music and a hero walking away in slow motion. No, in real life, it's quieter than that. It's a slow leak, not an explosion. You feel it in the little things first, like when you stop getting invited to meetings you used to run, or when your name disappears from the project credits, even though you were the one who stayed late 3 nights straight getting the delivery schedules to line up for the quarterly spike. It's when the new guy gets the air-conditioned van for the downtown route while you're still in the dented Freightliner with the busted fan that smells like wet dog and stale coffee. Jared had only been there a month before I noticed the change. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Everyone hates the new boss a little bit, especially one who walks in talking like he's pitching to investors instead of managing a damn shipping team. He had that Silicon Valley swagger, like he thought the world worked better if it was run through an app and a motivational podcast. The guy was 35 if that, wore a tailored button-up like he was on a recruiting poster, and he always seemed like he was running late for a meeting that made more money than you. When he arrived, the first thing he did was rename everything. I'm not even kidding, he changed logistics operations to dynamic routing. The break room became the recharge hub. We got laminated posters taped to the loading bay walls with phrases like engagement equals efficiency, and we don't just deliver goods, we deliver value. You couldn't take a leak without seeing some stupid acronym about GRIT or SDREM or whatever he came up with on his morning jog. But what really got me wasn't the fluff. I could ignore the branding stuff. I've been around long enough to see trends come and go. What started burning me out were the rules changing under my boots. Suddenly, there were mandatory check-ins before every shift with Jared or his little clipboard assistant named Logan, fresh out of business school and barely able to read a freight manifest without blinking 5 times. I used to start my shift with a coffee and a chat with the guys. Now it was, "Hey Mick, real quick, can you acknowledge receipt of your KPIs in the new driver portal?" Half the time the damn app didn't load. My hands were cracked from winter hauls, and they expected me to thumb-type progress updates like I was live-tweeting a TEDx talk. I got my first write-up in April. Said I was non-compliant with updated routing protocol. What really happened was a storm had shut down Route 315, so I detoured 15 minutes out to keep a delivery on time. Saved the client from halting their production line. But Jared saw that I hadn't followed the approved path and docked me for insubordination. I didn't argue. I just nodded, smiled, and added the incident to the file I was quietly keeping at home. By July, I'd been moved to the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., under the excuse that I was highly experienced and could operate independently. That was Jared speak for, "You're too expensive to fire outright, but I want you miserable enough to quit." I told myself I could take it. My daughter was in her first year at Ohio State, and my wife was picking up extra shifts at the pharmacy. We needed the health insurance, and I still believed that hard work would pay off if I just toughed it out. But it kept getting worse. The new hires got weekly recognition in company newsletters for doing things like optimizing load and timing, which, by the way, was something I'd trained them to do. Jared would stop by their stations, slap them on the back like he was a football coach, and throw out words like initiative and leadership potential. I got silence. Or worse, passive-aggressive notes about how I should consider adopting a more collaborative posture. Then came the uniforms. "We're going sleek and branded," Jared said in an all-staff email, "to represent Midstate's new face to our clients." They handed out new shirts, tight, form-fitting polyester blends with the company logo and some trendy sans serif font. The younger guys looked fine in them. I looked like a sausage casing stuffed into a billboard. I told HR it was restrictive and didn't breathe well on hot days. They said I could wear the old uniform for 2 more weeks while they looked into accommodations. 2 weeks later, I was written up for non-compliance with appearance standards. That was when I started keeping a separate record. I bought a notebook, nothing fancy, black cover, lined pages, and every day, I wrote down what happened. Every write-up, every odd scheduling change, every delivery that didn't match what I saw on the logs. I took pictures of manifests. I started quietly comparing delivery routes to invoice records. At night, in the break room while the guys were half asleep on microwaved burritos, I started building a case in my head. Because here's the thing, I'm not stupid. I might not have a degree, but I know when a guy's pushing you out. Jared couldn't fire me outright, not without HR raising questions, but he could bury me in policy and paperwork until I cracked. Or quit. Or made a mistake big enough to justify letting me go. But I didn't crack. I just watched. I waited. And every time he thought he'd scored another little win, I added it to the file. He thought I was old school. And yeah, maybe I am. But old school still knows how to take notes. And old school knows how to wait for the right moment to strike. I remember the exact night I found it, even down to the stale vending machine smell in the warehouse hallway and the flicker in the overhead light that had been broken for months. It was just after midnight, middle of a quiet Thursday shift, and I was triple-checking paperwork for a high-priority order that had to be on-site by 8 a.m. sharp. One of the smaller clients, but picky as hell, family-owned metal fabrication plant out in Springfield, guys who still sent Christmas cards to the warehouse if you hit your delivery window all year. I'd always liked them. Honest folks. Anyway, I pull up the manifest to make sure everything lines up, and I notice something weird. There's a signature on the delivery log from the day before, but the shipment hadn't left the building yet. At first, I thought maybe it was just a clerical error. Happens sometimes. Wrong date. Someone hits the wrong button on the handheld scanner, or one of the younger guys marks something as delivered because they forgot to update their status until later. But no, this one was different. The timestamp on the signature was 3:42 p.m. the day before. And I know that order hadn't left yet because it was still sitting in Bay 4 when I came in. The box had a bright orange, time-sensitive sticker on it. I'd walked past it 3 times that night. So I start digging a little, just to satisfy my curiosity. I check the log history for the past week, filtering for my own ID. And that's when I see it. 2 more entries with my name and employee number tied to deliveries I didn't make. I wasn't even scheduled those days. One of them, I'd called off to drive my wife to a specialist appointment in Dayton. I would have remembered that. But there it was, plain as day, delivered by M. Russo, signed off, timestamped, logged, all official. Now, I'm not a tech wizard, but I know enough to see when someone's been cutting corners and trying to cover it up. Our handheld delivery scanners sync to the main system through Wi-Fi, which meant every scan was trackable, every signature attached to a user ID, and every timestamp locked after submission. If someone was forging logs, they either had access to the admin panel or they were manually editing reports after hours using someone else's credentials. And the only person with that level of access besides IT was Jared Kindle. I felt this cold settle in my stomach, the kind of cold you get not when you're scared, but when you realize someone's been using your name like a pawn in their little game. I could have walked straight into Jared's office and asked what the hell was going on, but I knew how that would play out. He'd deny everything, blame it on a software glitch, and probably write me up for insubordination again. So I did what I'd already started doing for months. I made a copy. I printed the log entries and took photos with my phone just in case. Then I started tracking every delivery I touched, every route I ran, every time I clocked in or out. I started using a free GPS tracking app on my personal phone just to back up my official delivery routes. I'd take pictures of loaded pallets before departure, and sometimes even a quick video confirming the drop-off location. Nothing fancy, nothing too obvious. Just enough to show what really happened if things ever went sideways. And slowly, patterns started emerging. The forged logs weren't random. They were always tied to the same handful of clients. High-value accounts. Government contracts, mostly. Deliveries that, if they didn't hit their window, would trigger penalties or put the whole contract in jeopardy. Jared was using my ID to sign off on these deliveries early, logging them as complete so the company could meet deadlines, whether or not the freight had actually moved. What that meant, in plain terms, was someone was committing fraud, and they were using my name to do it. That's when I remembered a conversation I'd had months ago with one of our longtime clients, Jack, a guy who ran procurement for a military supply contractor. He'd mentioned how strict the compliance checks were getting, and how even small delivery inconsistencies could get flagged during audits. Back then, it just sounded like small talk. Now, it felt like foreshadowing. I didn't say anything right away. That's the part that might surprise people. I didn't blow the whistle or call HR or march into Jared's office with a smoking gun. Because I knew something about guys like him. Jared played the game with flash and speed, but he didn't play it for the long haul. He thought he could cut corners, polish the numbers, and write a few shiny reports straight into a higher-paying job in 6 months. And if something went wrong, he'd just blame whoever was left holding the bag. In this case, me. So I kept quiet, kept building my case. I even mailed copies of the logs to my cousin Greg, who works in state logistics compliance. I didn't ask him to do anything, just told him to keep them safe in case I ever needed to explain myself. Greg's a good guy, no nonsense, and he knew better than to ask too many questions. Meanwhile, Jerry kept doing what he always did, bragging during meetings, charming the higher-ups, giving speeches about leveraging efficiencies. And I just kept driving, kept watching, kept logging everything. Because now I wasn't just trying to survive. I was waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the company to step 1 foot too far off the ledge. And I wasn't going to say a word until I was ready to kick. The morning after Jared fired me, I didn't sleep in like most people would. I woke up at 6:15 like always, out of habit more than purpose, and stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee pot like it had the answers. My wife came in around 7, still in her robe, didn't say much, just rubbed my back in that quiet way she does when she knows I'm holding something heavy inside. I told her I wasn't going to do anything reckless. She nodded, didn't press. We both knew that wasn't entirely true. See, I hadn't walked out of that warehouse the day before with nothing. I didn't just leave with my dignity and a box of old thermoses and service pins. I left with knowledge. I left with a file, well, two technically. One digital and one hard copy, meticulously kept, cross-referenced, time-stamped, and backed up twice. Every shady delivery log. Every discrepancy I found between what left the building and what the reports claimed. Every forged signature that just happened to look an awful lot like mine, complete with the weird loop in the art that I stopped doing back in 2019. I'd spent the last 6 months putting the pieces together, but I never moved. Not until Jared gave me a reason. Not until he said the words out loud and made it personal. You're just a driver. That's what flipped the switch. Because I wasn't just a driver, I was the guy who knew where every body was buried. And I was finally ready to start digging them up. I made 3 phone calls that morning. The first was to Jack, the procurement guy I'd mentioned before, the one who ran logistics for that government contract and used to send us candy baskets every Christmas. I didn't tell him everything, just asked if he'd had any issues lately with mid-state deliveries not matching documentation. His tone changed instantly. He said there'd been some inconsistencies, but nothing concrete. I told him he might want to dig a little deeper. Told him to check the manifest from last Tuesday and see if the driver's signature matched my handwriting. He was quiet for a second, then said, "I'll get back to you." The second call was to a buddy of mine named Darren, who works for the Department of Transportation doing internal reviews for shipping firms across the state. We used to haul routes together back in the day, before he went white-collar. I asked him what kind of trouble a company could get into for submitting falsified delivery records on state-contracted freight. He didn't laugh, just said, "Is this a real question?" and then followed it with a low whistle when I gave him the short version. He asked if I had proof. I said, "Plenty." The third call was to my cousin Greg, the one who'd been holding the envelope for me. I told him it was time to open it. He asked if I was sure. I told him I was more sure of this than anything else I'd done in the past 5 years. He said he'd make sure it got where it needed to go. Now, none of this blew up overnight. I didn't press a big red button and watch the company implode in slow motion while sipping a cold beer. But within 10 days of my firing, the cracks started showing. First came the delivery delays. Not because I sabotaged anything, but because they'd been building their numbers on fiction for so long that without me running the routes clean and double-checking the load sheets, the whole system collapsed under its own lies. Clients called in angry, asking why their orders were late or missing altogether. A few even refused to pay invoices until they got proof of delivery. Trouble was, those proofs of delivery didn't exist. Or worse, they existed, but were for shipments that never left the loading dock. I heard from a friend still inside that Jared called an emergency staff meeting on the 3rd Thursday after I left, trying to get the team to help reconstruct the logs. That's corporate talk for cover your ass. But there were too many holes, too many missing pallets, too many signatures from people who weren't even on shift that day. Then came the auditors. Not the polite kind either. These were sharp-suited guys with federal badges and clipboards so stiff they could break ribs. They showed up unannounced one rainy Monday morning and started asking questions Jared couldn't answer. Started pulling records from the past 2 fiscal quarters. Started interviewing drivers, warehouse clerks, and even the night shift janitor. I got a text from Logan, the clipboard kid, saying, "Dude, what the hell is going on?" I didn't respond. I figured he'd learn soon enough. Jared tried to spin it, of course. Said it was a systems issue. Blamed the transition to the new delivery tracking software. Said they were implementing corrective action plans and real-time reporting initiatives. But those words don't mean much when your logs say a shipment was delivered at 3:30 and the GPS on the truck says it was still parked in the company lot. Or when a client swears a package arrived damaged and your records say it never existed in the first place. What Jared didn't know, what he still probably doesn't know, is that I didn't send the report to just one place. I made sure the audit trail went wide. State regulators, a contact in federal transportation compliance, even an anonymous tip line at the Department of Defense, since at least one of those contracts involved military hardware. I didn't lie. I didn't fabricate a single thing. All I did was hand over the truth, wrapped up neat, indexed, timestamped, and presented by the man who was just a driver. I wasn't trying to burn the place down, at least, not at first. But once someone lights the match and hands it to you, sometimes you don't mind holding it a little longer than you should. And the best part? I never once broke a rule. Never touched a file I wasn't authorized to view. Never tampered, never deleted, never even raised my voice. I let Jared do all the hard work himself. I just made sure someone was finally watching. Funny how fast the fall comes when the floor gives out beneath a guy who thinks he's standing on top. 3 weeks after I turned in my keys and walked out of Midstate Freight Solutions, I drove past the warehouse just to see what it looked like without me in it. Not out of nostalgia exactly, more like curiosity, like checking in on an old injury to see if the scar's still there. It was just before sundown, the building washed in that kind of dusty orange light that makes everything look more dramatic than it really is. But even in that glow, the place looked smaller than I remembered, like time had already started erasing me from its story. The parking lot was half empty, no music from the loading dock, no one shouting over forklifts or laughing during a smoke break. Just silence. And you know what? I didn't miss it. I'd been hearing things, of course. Small-town logistics is a tight circle, and word travels faster than the actual freight sometimes. A buddy who still runs routes told me Jared had been reassigned pending investigation, which is company speak for, "We're waiting to see how bad this gets before deciding if we have to fire him or just pretend he resigned." HR's doing damage control, apparently. Everyone's being reminded of protocol and encouraged to cooperate fully with all inquiries. Meanwhile, the CFO, who once called me salt of the earth, while shaking my hand at a holiday party, hasn't been seen in over a week. Yes, the salt started stinging once the wounds opened up. What they didn't expect, I think, was how clean it all was. There was no angry outburst from me, no vandalized equipment or bitter email blast to all staff. I didn't storm into an executive meeting with receipts and threats. I just quietly let the truth walk through the front door with a clipboard and a badge. Let the record speak. Let the silence fill in what my voice never had to. The facts did the yelling for me, and they did it a hell of a lot louder than I ever could. I've been asked, by friends mostly, and once by my daughter when I told her the gist of what happened, if I feel bad about it. If I think I went too far. I usually shrug, sip whatever's in my cup, and say something like, "I just told the truth." But if I'm being honest, and at this point, there's not much use in lying, I don't feel bad. Not even a little. I feel tired, mostly, and maybe a little sad, because I gave a big chunk of my life to that company. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, little league games. I drove through ice storms, heat waves, and the kind of fog you could drown in. All because I believed that showing up mattered. That loyalty meant something. But it didn't. Not to them. Not when it came time to choose between integrity and quarterly metrics. That kind of betrayal doesn't make you angry, not at first. It makes you hollow. It makes you question if all those years you spent being the dependable one, the guy who never called off unless someone died, the one who taught new hires the ropes and covered shifts without asking for anything in return, it makes you wonder if that guy was just a sucker in the end. But then you realize something important. They can take your job, they can take your title, but they can't take the truth. And if they build their empire on lies using your name, well, they don't get to be surprised when it crumbles under their feet. I've gotten a few offers since then. Quiet calls from other companies who heard about a driver with a backbone and a memory like a steel trap. Nothing I've taken yet. I've been enjoying the stillness too much. Catching up on sleep. Sitting on the porch with my wife. Watching the birds in the morning instead of highway mile markers blur past my windshield. I even helped my neighbor fix up an old motorcycle that had been rusting in his shed since '98. Funny, I always thought I'd fall apart without a routine. Turns out I just needed a different one. Still, part of me's thinking about what's next. I've got some savings now, plus a modest severance check they sent to settle any future claims. I haven't cashed it yet. Probably won't. It felt more like hush money than anything else. But it's a nice reminder that I made them nervous. That someone, somewhere, is sitting in a glass office wondering how a simple driver unraveled their whole operation with nothing but patience and a pile of receipts. I don't know if I'll get back behind the wheel for a company again. Maybe I'll start my own little thing. Just me, a couple of trucks, and a few guys I trust who've been burned like I was. No slogans. No culture fit nonsense. Just honest work, done right. Or maybe I'll take a break. A real one. Learn how to fish. Read something that isn't a policy memo. Let the silence stretch out and not be afraid of what it means. Because for the first time in a long time, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I already heard it hit the floor. And it wasn't mine. It was Jared's. So yeah, maybe I was just a driver. But I was also the guy who knew every corner of the map, every name on every log, every corner they cut hoping no one would notice. And when the time came, I made damn sure they remembered who they underestimated.